What if the man who stood at the entrance of that building every single morning, in a black city security uniform 2 sizes too big, helmet tucked under one arm, rain soaking through his shoulders like he didn't even feel it, what if that man had never once in his life been handed something without a price attached to it? What if he had walked into rooms that made grown men go silent? What if a single word from him could end a career, a reputation, a life? What if he had spent 34 years surrounded by people who feared him, flattered him, needed something from him, and had never once, not once, sat across from someone who simply offered? And what if you, a black woman from a city that never slowed down for you, carrying a tote bag full of groceries and a lunch you packed yourself because the building cafeteria was just too expensive, what if you were the very first person in that man's entire life who just looked at him and said, "You hungry? Here. I made too much anyway." No angle. No agenda. Just a small cup of tteokbokki under a rain-soaked street tent, held out by a woman with round glasses and a smile she gave freely, to people who had never once earned it. She didn't know what he was. And he had no idea what that one moment was going to cost him. This is Jennifer's story. And his. Let's set the scene. The rain came down in sheets the night Ha-jun first took the post. He stood beneath the awning of the Yongsan commercial district, hands clasped behind his back, posture straight as a blade, wearing a uniform that belonged to a man named Park Sung-woo. A man who had quietly accepted 3 months' salary to disappear to Busan and ask absolutely no questions. The badge on Ha-jun's chest said City Security. The helmet under his arm was yellow. Scuffed. He had not slept in 31 hours. And not one single person looked at him twice. That was the point. For 12 years, he had been the kind of man that rooms reorganized themselves around. The kind of man whose car pulling up outside a restaurant was enough to clear the private dining floor without a word being spoken. And now here he was, standing in the rain while office workers rushed past him, umbrellas clipping his shoulder, not one of them pausing to apologize. A delivery driver nearly ran over his foot and didn't even look back. Ha-jun didn't move. He catalogued everything. Every face, every pattern, every vehicle that circled the block more than twice. Because he was here for a reason. Someone inside his organization had been feeding information to the Daejin group for 8 months. 8 months of slow, strategic leaks that looked like bad luck, until you stacked them side by side and saw the pattern underneath. A shipment rerouted. A meeting location burned before his men arrived. Witnesses who agreed to stay quiet suddenly changing their minds. Approached by people who should never have known their names. Ha-jun had sat alone in his office at 2 in the morning with a glass of water he forgot to drink and a list of 43 names. He had circled 3 of them. 2 of those men worked right here, in this district. And he needed to get close, without being seen. Without being recognized. Without anyone realizing that the most feared man in 6 districts was standing at a building entrance in a second-hand uniform, watching. Nobody watches the security guard. So he became one. He left his car. He left the phone registered to his name. He left the watch, a Patek Philippe that cost more than most people made in a year, locked away in a storage unit on the edge of the city. He kept one untraceable phone, one change of clothes, and the discipline of a man who had learned from a very young age that comfort was something you could not afford. The first morning, he stood at the post at 6:45 and counted how many people walked past without seeing him. 41. In the first hour alone. Not one made eye contact. He had spent a decade commanding attention simply by existing. And now he was furniture. A prop in the background of other people's mornings. A man holding a yellow helmet, drifting slowly to the edges of everyone's peripheral vision, unregistered. Unremembered. It was purely tactical. It was supposed to be purely tactical. But somewhere in that second hour, standing in the thin morning cold while a woman in heels nearly walked straight through him, too busy reaching for her phone to notice he was even there, something moved through him that he didn't immediately have a name for. He filed it away. He was good at that. He had always been good at filing things away. What he was not good at what his entire life had been deliberately constructed to prevent, was being watched back. She appeared on the fourth day. He had noticed her before that, briefly. A woman who came and went through the side entrance instead of the main lobby, which he had already flagged as unusual for permanent staff. But on the fourth day, she slowed down. Not completely. Just enough that he caught the shift in her pace before she stopped and turned to look at him, not with suspicion, not with curiosity, but with something quieter than either. Consideration. Like she was solving a small, gentle problem. She went to the tteokbokki stall without a word. He watched her talk to the vendor with the ease of someone who had made that same exchange 100 times, laughing at something the old man said, adjusting the strap of her canvas tote bag, the one printed with little illustrated bottles of hot sauce and ramen. The rain was getting heavier. She didn't seem to mind. When she came back and held the cup out toward him, he had already told himself it was nothing. A small gesture from someone who noticed he'd been standing in the rain. He would take it, nod, and return to his work. What he hadn't prepared for was the way she looked at him when she held it out. Not like she was doing him a favor. Not like she expected to be thanked or remembered. Just like it was the obvious thing to do. Like feeding someone standing in the cold was simply what you did when you had enough and they were there. He took the cup. She smiled, the full kind, the kind that people forget to perform, and walked back through the side entrance without asking his name. He stood in the rain and ate the tteokbokki. And for the first time in longer than he could honestly remember, he thought about something other than power. Before we go any further, go ahead and subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss a story. And drop a comment telling us what country you're watching from. It truly means a lot seeing this community grow all the way around the world. Every single view, every comment, every share, it helps us keep bringing these stories to life. Together. She came back the next day. And the day after that. It became a thing before he fully understood it was becoming a thing. She would come through the side entrance sometime between 12:15 and 12:30, exchange a few words with him, easy, unhurried words, the kind that didn't need anything from him, then go to the stall and come back with 2 cups, handing him one like it had already been agreed upon. Like he had asked. He had never asked. He didn't know how to ask for things like this. His entire adult life had been built on the principle that needing anything from anyone was a weakness you simply could not afford. Her name was Jennifer. He learned that on the 3rd day of their routine. She worked the early cleaning shift, floors 4 through 7, started before the building opened and finished by noon. She was from Houston originally. Had come to Seoul 3 years ago chasing a job offer that fell through, and stayed because leaving felt like admitting something she wasn't quite ready to admit yet. She said all of this without any self-pity. The way you describe the weather, factually, with a kind of steady calm that didn't ask for a response. He told her his name was Juno. She accepted it without question, without pressing, and that was either trust or disinterest. He spent 2 full days deciding which one it was. He landed, uncomfortably, on trust. She trusted him the way someone does when they haven't yet been given a reason not to. And that ease, that simple, unearned ease, sat in his chest in a way that had no strategic application and absolutely no clean explanation. He started paying attention to the small things she said. Not because they were relevant to his work, they weren't, but because she spoke the way almost nobody in his life had ever spoken to him. Without performance. Without calculation. She complained about the 4th floor supply closet being reorganized by someone who had clearly never cleaned a bathroom in their life. She told him about a street cat that waited near the side entrance most mornings. She'd named it Donut, because of the shape of its tail. She asked him once, out of what seemed like genuine curiosity, whether he found it lonely, standing in one place all day. He said no without thinking. And then spent the rest of the afternoon thinking about it. He wasn't lonely in the way she meant. Loneliness, in the way most people understood it, required the belief that connection was something you were supposed to have. Ha-jun had cut that belief out of himself so completely that most days he couldn't even find where it used to live. But there was something sitting right next to loneliness. Something like the awareness of an absence you had stopped naming, because naming it made it heavier, and he had been carrying it so long it had started to feel like just the way he stood. She was doing something to that. Slowly. Without even trying. He noticed it first in the way he started arriving at the post 5 minutes earlier than he needed to. Then in the way he found himself, midway through an evening surveillance review, remembering something she had said about the cat. And almost, letting himself find it funny. Then came the afternoon she arrived late. Coat damp from running through heavier rain, glasses slightly fogged, holding only one cup because the stall had nearly sold out. She gave it to him anyway. He told her to keep it. She told him she'd already eaten inside. He later saw the vending machine receipt fall from her bag. She hadn't eaten. She just didn't want him to feel like a burden. She was quietly rearranging reality so that he would be more comfortable, the way people do when they have made a decision, without announcing it, that someone else's ease matters. It was such a small thing. Ha-jun went back to the guest house that night and sat on the edge of the narrow bed and thought about how long it had been since anyone told him a comfortable lie for his benefit rather than their own. He thought about his 3 suspects. He was close enough to feel it. A pattern in the logistics manager's communication schedule was 2, maybe 3 observations away from becoming real evidence. He had a timeline. He had a plan. He had everything he came here to find. And sitting with all of it, for the first time since this started, he found that it didn't feel like enough. He didn't examine that too closely. He set it aside, the way he had been setting inconvenient things aside since he was a child. But it stayed there. Right at the edge of everything. The way the cup of tteokbokki had stayed warm longer than it should have in the cold. On the morning of the 19th day, he arrived at the post and found Donut sitting near the side entrance. The cat looked at him with the complete indifference that only cats and very powerful people ever truly master. And his first thought, before he could stop it, was, she's going to be happy about that. He thought it before he could catch himself. And in the space where he would normally have sealed it off, something stayed open just a fraction too long. He was in trouble. Not the kind he had built his career surviving. Not the kind with clean solutions and acceptable losses. The kind that arrives quietly, through a side entrance, in a trench coat, with food she splits without being asked. He straightened his uniform. He reset his expression. He reminded himself that he was Ha-jun Seo. That he had a mission. That sentiment was a door people walked through when they were ready to lose something. And then Jennifer came through the side entrance, saw the cat, and made a sound of pure delight she didn't bother to hide at all, and looked up immediately to see if he had noticed. He had. He didn't smile. But he didn't look away either. And in the language of a man who had spent years forgetting how to want simple things, that was already more than he had given anyone in a very long time. The first sign was the silver sedan. He clocked it on a Tuesday, parked 40 meters east of the building entrance, engine off, 2 men inside who didn't speak to each other and didn't touch their phones. Amateur surveillance had tells. Professionals had different ones. These men were somewhere in between, which meant they were hired recently, briefed quickly, which meant whoever sent them was moving faster than Ha-jun had planned for. He ran the plate that evening. The vehicle traced back through 3 layers of clean incorporation to a name he recognized. Baek Tae-sung. A mid-level Daejin operator who specialized in pressure, not the lethal kind. Not yet. The watching kind. The kind designed to be noticed. A message that said simply, "We know where you are." Which meant his cover had a crack in it he hadn't found yet. He spent that night dismantling every assumption he had made about his own invisibility. Someone had talked. The circle of people who knew he was in Yongsan was so small it barely existed. His second-in-command, one logistics contact, the fixer who arranged Park Sung-woo's exit. He eliminated the fixer first. That left 2. And arriving at the conclusion that the rot was closer to him than he had believed, that didn't land cleanly. It arrived the way fault lines do. Quiet, until they weren't. He changed his route back to the guest house. Moved his materials. Extended his hours. Said nothing to anyone. He also said nothing to Jennifer. He told himself it was clean logic. She was separate from this. She was a woman who shared her lunch and laughed at a street cat and had no idea that the man she handed tteokbokki to every afternoon was the precise reason train surveillance was now parked within walking distance of the building she cleaned for a living. Keeping her separate wasn't sentiment. It was strategy. He believed that almost completely. She arrived Wednesday with a thermos because she had decided, matter-of-factly, that paper cups in serious rain were an engineering failure she refused to keep participating in. She poured carefully, handed him the cap to drink from, kept the body of it for herself. The whole arrangement was so natural and so quietly domestic that something moved through his chest before he could reclassify it as nothing. He watched the silver sedan over her shoulder while she talked. He nodded in the right places. And then, once, briefly, he laughed. A real one. Small and involuntary, gone almost before it arrived. But there. She caught it immediately. She looked at him the way she sometimes did, that steady, considering look, and said, "You should do that more." He said, "Do what?" She gestured vaguely at his face. And walked back inside before he could find an answer. The sedan was gone by 4. That was worse than if it had stayed. By Friday there was a second vehicle. A black SUV, rotating shifts, different plates, different men. They were no longer just watching the building. They were mapping movement. And the pattern was broader than one man's schedule. He made contact with his second-in-command that night through a code that would have sounded, to anyone listening, like a dull conversation about apartment rentals. What he learned made him sit very still for a long time. The Daejin group had identified 3 people connected to his location. One was his logistics contact. One was the fixer. And the third was a description. A black woman, early 30s, seen talking regularly with the security guard at the Yongsan commercial building. They didn't have her name yet. They had her routine. Hajun set the phone down. He understood pressure tactics better than most. He had used them himself. You find the softest thing near your target and you apply weight to it. Sometimes just the suggestion of weight is enough. You let the target know you can reach it, and then you watch what they do next. Jennifer had done nothing. She had simply been kind in exactly the wrong direction. And now she had a description sitting in a Daejin file, and a routine that had been watched, and a name they were in the process of finding. He had had 17 chances to walk away from those 12:30 conversations. He had chosen, every single time, not to. He needed 3 more days. 3 days to close the case on the logistics manager. Certainty without evidence was just instinct, and instinct alone wouldn't hold. 3 days, and then he could extract, address the betrayal, and make sure Jennifer's name disappeared from every file the Daejin group had started building. 3 days was manageable. He miscalculated. She found the contact sheet on a Thursday. One moment of carelessness after 19 days of precision. He had stepped away from the side entrance to answer a question from a building tenant, and he left the paper on the ledge for 40 seconds. Jennifer came through the door in those 40 seconds. He knew she had seen it the moment he returned. Not because of what she said. Because of what her face did, not the warm look, not the open look, but something quieter and more careful. The look of a woman who was reorganizing what she thought she knew. She didn't say anything that day. She handed him his portion of the thermos and talked about Donut, who had apparently gotten into a territorial dispute with a second cat near the east entrance. He matched her tone. He said the right things. And he felt, for the first time since any of this began, that he was performing for her rather than simply being near her. That distinction felt awful in a way he hadn't expected. The next morning she arrived early. She stood beside him and said, without looking at him directly, "Juno. Who are you actually?" Not a question. A statement holding a question mark behind it, patient and serious. He said, "A security guard." She turned and looked at him fully then. Security guards don't carry documents with organizational charts on them. Security guards don't track every vehicle that passes twice. Security guards don't watch everything the way you watch everything. He said nothing. She said, I'm not trying to get into your business. And she stopped. Started again. I brought lunch to a stranger every single day for 3 weeks because it felt like the right thing to do. I'd like to know if I was wrong about what I was looking at. The honest answer was, you were never wrong. You were looking at something real. You were also looking at someone whose real life is currently putting your name into a file with people who do not share your values about kindness. He said, you weren't wrong. It wasn't enough. He could see that clearly. But it was what he could give her without breaking open everything he wasn't ready to break open yet. She nodded, the slow nod of someone accepting an incomplete answer while making a careful note of its incompleteness, and handed him the thermos cap. And they stood in the quiet of a Thursday morning with something new and fragile and slightly damaged sitting between them. That night the black SUV ran a different pattern. Slower. Closer to the side entrance. At 11:47, 4 words arrived on the untraceable phone from his second-in-command. They have her name. He was already moving before he finished reading. He ran the route from the guest house to the Yongsan building in 11 minutes. Confirmed in under 2 that Jennifer's apartment building, 3 blocks north, a detail she had mentioned once, casually, in a conversation about the neighborhood cats, was now the SUV's focal point. He had remembered it. So had someone else. He called in every favor available to a man in a second-hand security uniform with one untraceable phone. 4 men, positioned quietly within the block radius. He was buying 30 minutes. Maybe 40. Just enough time to get her out before Dae-jin pressure moved from watching to contact. He rang her apartment bell at 12:08 in the morning. She opened the door with the chain on, which was sensible, and looked at him through the gap with an expression that moved from sleep-soft to wide-awake in less than a second. She could read his face. She had always been able to read his face, which was a face most people found completely illegible. He said, I need you to trust me for approximately 1 hour and I will explain everything after. She said, that is an extremely suspicious thing to say. He said, I know. I'm sorry. You need to get your bag and your phone and come with me right now. A long pause. The chain still on. Her eyes moving over his face with that steady considering look he had catalogued and quietly returned to more times than was professionally appropriate. She took the chain off. He got her out through the service exit. Walked her 4 blocks east to a car one of his men had positioned. Put her in it. Gave the driver an address. And then did not get in himself, because there was still something he needed to finish. She grabbed his arm through the open window. She said, Juno. He said, my name is Ha-jun. Ha-jun Seo. He watched her face take the name in. Watched the exact moment it landed. In Seoul, in the circles that mattered, that name carried a specific, unmistakable weight. He watched the weight arrive. He watched her absorb it without looking away. She said, you're serious. He said, you're going to be safe. I need you to go. The car moved. He watched it turn the corner. He stayed watching the empty street for 3 seconds longer than was tactically necessary. Then he turned around and went back to finish what he had come to Yongsan to do. The confrontation with the logistics manager happened in a parking structure 2 blocks from the commercial building. It was brief. Cold. Efficient, the way Ha-jun at his most controlled was capable of being. The man broke in under 6 minutes. The name he gave was the name Ha-jun had already arrived at himself. A lieutenant. Money, protection, reasons that Ha-jun listened to completely and found both understandable and unacceptable. He made 2 calls. He left the logistics manager with the understanding that the next 18 months of his life would be unpleasant but survivable, which was a more lenient outcome than the man had any right to expect. And then Ha-jun stood alone in that parking structure, in a black city security uniform, holding a yellow helmet under fluorescent lights, and thought about the look on her face when he said his real name. She was sitting at the kitchen table when he arrived. Cup of something warm between her hands. Still in her coat. Glasses on. She looked up when he came in. Not with fear. Not with the kind of recalculated anger he had been quietly preparing himself for the entire walk over. The anger of a woman who realizes she gave her warmth to someone she should have avoided. She looked at him the way she always had. That direct, considering look. The one that had never seemed to need him to be anything other than exactly what he was. She said, how much of it was real? He set the helmet on the counter. He sat down across from her. Which was not something Ha-Jun-seo did. He did not sit across from people at kitchen tables at 2 in the morning and prepare to be honest. He had built his entire way of living specifically to prevent this configuration, and he said. All of it. She was quiet. He said, the uniform wasn't real. The name wasn't real. Everything else. He stopped. Started again. The laugh was real. I hadn't done that in a long time. She turned the cup slowly in her hands. She said, I want to be angry. He said, you should be. She said, I am. I'm also, and she stopped too. And they both sat with that incompleteness. Two people who had found something genuine inside a constructed situation, now figuring out what it meant on the other side of it. She said, finally, you could have told me. He said, I know. She said, you chose not to. He said, I was protecting you. And I was, a pause that cost him something, I was afraid of what you would do with it. People find out who I am and they change. Everyone changes. And I didn't, she said. Not a question. You couldn't have, he said. You didn't know. But I knew you, she said. Whatever you were calling yourself. I knew you. Ha-Jun looked at her across that kitchen table and thought about 34 years of building walls. About the particular quality of silence that lived inside those walls, expensive, protected silence. The kind that got mistaken constantly for strength but was really just the sound of a man who had forgotten that being known by someone was something you could actually survive. He said, I know you did. She nodded. Drank from her cup. He could see the decisions moving behind her eyes, the quiet, ongoing work of a woman who was hurt and clear-headed and not willing to perform more forgiveness or more damage than she actually felt. She said, what happens now? He had an empire to return to. A betrayal to formally address. A structure that had been running on stored loyalty for 3 weeks while he stood in the rain watching sedans, and that would need his full attention, his full presence, the complete weight of who Ha-Jun-seo was, to stabilize. He thought about all of that. He said, I'm going to make sure you're completely clear of anything connected to me. Your name, your building, your routine, I'll have all of it removed from every record. You'll be safe within 48 hours. She said, that's not what I asked. He looked at her. She said, I asked what happens now. Not what you're going to fix. What happens? And Ha-Jun-seo, who had an answer for everything, who had built his entire existence on the premise that preparation was the only real form of safety, who had handled a betrayal with cold precision in a parking structure 20 minutes ago without hesitating once. He said, I don't know. And it was the truest thing he had said in longer than he could calculate. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and refilled his cup from the small pot on the counter. The same unhurried ease. The same quiet certainty. The same gesture she had made every afternoon for 3 weeks at a street stall in the rain, like feeding someone who needed it was simply what you did, no matter what you had just found out about them, no matter what it cost you. He watched her do it. He thought, I spent 34 years becoming the kind of man no one could touch. He thought, I would like to find out what it costs to become a different kind. He didn't say either of those things. He picked up the cup. She watched him with that look. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the Yongsan district was doing what cities do at 2 in the morning, continuing on, indifferently, without them. And for the first time in a very long time, Ha-Jun was somewhere that felt Improbably, impossibly, against every wall he had ever built, like a place he did not need to surveil. Like a place he could simply be. If you made it all the way to the end of this story, then you already know this channel is something different. Subscribe and hit the bell so you're here for every new story we bring you, and share this one with someone who needs a reminder that the most powerful thing any person can do is choose to be human. This community means everything to us. Every view, every share, every new person who finds their way here, you are the reason we keep going. Thank you for being here. Together, we are just getting started.